He makes me feel alive in ways you never could, my wife said after months of defending her friendship with a coworker I was supposed to ignore. I simply packed my things and left. Months later, she showed up unexpectedly after discovering the life she chose wasn't what she imagined. He makes me feel alive in ways you never could. Ansley said it like she was stating a fact about the weather. Casual, unbothered, like the sentence hadn't just rearranged every molecule in the room. I remember standing very still, the kind of still where your body understands something before your mind does. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't say a single word. I just looked at her, my wife of 9 years, and felt something quietly close inside me. I didn't realize it then, but that sentence would destroy everything we had built. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I'm 37. I work in corporate strategy consulting. Ansley is 34 and works in marketing at a mid-sized tech firm in Denver. We bought our house in the Cherry Creek neighborhood 6 years ago. Nice yard. 2-car garage. The kind of life people described as goals in Instagram comments. We met in our late 20s, got married after 2 years, and for a long time things were good. Not perfect, but genuinely good. The kind of good where you don't think to question it. That was my first mistake. His name was Callan. He joined Ansley's company 18 months before everything fell apart. New hire, marketing team, her department. She mentioned him once, casually, the way you mention a coworker. There's this new guy, Callan. He's actually really funny. I nodded. Said something like, that's nice. Didn't think about it again. But she mentioned him again the following week. And the week after that. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, his name started appearing in more and more of her stories. At the time, I ignored it. I wish I hadn't. The first time I felt something was off was a Tuesday in October. We had plans. Nothing big. Dinner at this Italian place we liked on Larimer Street, a standing reservation we'd had for years. She called at 5:30. I'm going to be late. Team thing. Don't wait for me. I waited anyway. By 8 o'clock, I ordered alone. By 9, I was home. By 10, she walked in still laughing at something on her phone, which she turned face down on the counter before kissing my cheek. Sorry. You know how it gets. I didn't ask who she was texting. That wasn't the last strange thing. November brought a new pattern. She started keeping her phone closer. Not dramatically, not stuffed in a pocket or guarded like a state secret, but closer. Charging on her side of the bed instead of on the kitchen counter. Taken into the bathroom during showers. Little things. The kind you'd feel stupid pointing out. I noticed her laughing more, too. At her phone specifically. This private, quiet smile she'd get. Then she'd look up and the smile would shift, become something more neutral when her eyes met mine. I told myself I was imagining it. I almost convinced myself. Then Quentin called. Quentin has been a mutual friend since before Ansley and I started dating. He's the kind of person who knows everything happening in everyone's life, but says nothing unless it matters. He called on a Saturday morning while Ansley was at yoga. Hey, he said, I'm going to say something and I need you to hear it without doing anything stupid. I sat down. There's talk. Around her office. About Ansley and the new guy. What kind of talk? The kind people whisper. I didn't say anything for a long moment. How long? I finally asked. A few months, maybe. Nobody knows anything for certain. I just thought you should know it's out there. I thanked him. Hung up. Sat in the kitchen until I heard her car in the driveway. I had something I still didn't know. Whether any of it was true. I didn't confront her that day. I know that sounds cowardly. It wasn't. It was strategic, or at least I told myself it was. I wanted to be certain before I said something I couldn't take back. I wanted to be the kind of person who gathered facts instead of detonating accusations. So I watched. And what I saw over the next several weeks built a picture I didn't want to look at. A work dinner that ran until midnight. A conference in Boulder she hadn't mentioned until 48 hours before leaving. Texts she answered immediately, even at 2 a.m., but emails from me sometimes sat for hours. She started talking about Callan in a particular way. The way you talk about someone you're comparing other people to without realizing it. Callan thinks the whole industry is going through a reset. You'd actually like Callan. He's analytical like you. That last one bothered me more than anything else. Like she was building a bridge between us, and then offering to let me cross it toward a man she was already standing with. I brought it up for the first time in December. Not accusatory. Calm. Over dinner at home. I've noticed you mention Callan a lot. She set her fork down. He's a colleague. We work closely together. I know. I'm just saying, it's a lot. You're being insecure. She picked her fork back up. He's a friend. That's allowed. I'm not saying it isn't. Then what are you saying? I looked at her for a moment. I'm saying I've noticed a shift between us, and I want to understand it. She said I was overreacting. She said this was exactly why she felt like she couldn't talk to me. She said I was making something out of nothing and that it was exhausting. I backed down. That was my second mistake. January, Thatcher, my best friend since college, came to Denver for a long weekend. We grew up differently, him and I, but we'd always been honest with each other in the way that only works between people who don't need anything from each other. Over drinks Friday night, I told him what had been happening. He listened without interrupting. That alone told me how seriously he was taking it. Does she know you've clocked it? He asked. She knows I've said something. She shut it down. And you let her? It wasn't a question. Yeah. He turned his glass slowly on the bar. You're a reasonable man in an unreasonable situation, he said. The problem is reasonable men lose these kinds of fights because the other person isn't playing by the same rules. I thought about that for a long time after he went home. February arrived like a verdict. Ansley and I had agreed. Her suggestion, actually, to see a marriage counselor. Someone named Vivian, soft-spoken, with an office downtown full of gray furniture and low light. 3 sessions in, Vivian said something that I think was meant to open a conversation, but instead closed one. Ansley, it sounds like you've been feeling unseen for some time. Can you say more about that? And Ansley said, looking not at me, but at some fixed point on the wall. I've just started to realize that maybe I need things I haven't been getting here. Vivian asked what kinds of things. Ansley didn't answer directly. She said something about spontaneity, about being known, about feeling like a version of herself she preferred. I sat very still. After the session, walking to our separate cars, I asked her quietly, is this about Callan? She didn't answer right away. Then, don't make this about him. That wasn't a no. I filed that away. March was when I found the messages. I wasn't looking. I want to be clear about that. I'd made a decision early on not to go through her phone, not because I didn't want to know, but because I understood that whatever I found would change me in ways I couldn't predict. But she left her laptop open. She'd stepped outside to take a call. From her mother, she said, and I walked through the kitchen to refill my water and saw the screen. The browser was open. Her email. And there, in the middle of the inbox, was a subject line that stopped me cold. Next time. I didn't click it. I stood there for 11 seconds. I counted without meaning to, and then I walked away. But I'd seen the sender. And I knew. I didn't say anything that night. Or the next night. I went to work. I had meetings. I had a call with a client, Evelyn, about a restructuring project that needed my full attention, and I gave it to her, because that's what I do. I show up and I work and I keep moving. But underneath everything, I was processing. Quietly. Methodically. The way I do when something is too large to look at directly. I called Sawyer, an attorney I knew professionally, just to understand my options. Not to act. Just to know. He walked me through the basics. Kept it clean. Said the word documentation a few times. I hung up and sat in my car in the parking structure for 20 minutes. Then I went back upstairs and finished my work. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in late March. I'd gotten home first. Cooked dinner. Pasta? Simple. Something I'd made 100 times. Set the table. Waited. She came home at 7:30. We ate mostly in silence. She seemed distracted. Present in body, but somewhere else entirely. After dinner, while she was rinsing dishes, I said, I want to talk about Callan. She turned off the water. We've talked about this. We've talked around it. That's different. She turned to face me. Arms crossed. What do you want me to say? I want you to be honest with me. For once, without the deflection. Tell me what's actually happening. She looked at me for a long time. And something in her expression shifted. The defensiveness cracked, and underneath it wasn't guilt or remorse. It was something that looked almost like relief. You want honesty? She said. Yes. She uncrossed her arms. Leaned back against the counter. He makes me feel alive in ways you never could. The room went very quiet. I heard the refrigerator hum. I heard a car pass outside. I looked at my wife, at the woman I'd built a life with, whose parents I knew, whose childhood stories I'd memorized, whose fears I'd held in the middle of the night, and I understood, with absolute clarity, that she had just told me exactly where we stood. Not by accident. Not carelessly. She had chosen that sentence. She had held it somewhere inside her. And tonight, she had finally let it go. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to clarify or walk it back or explain what she meant. I simply said, okay. And I meant it. I slept in the guest room that night. In the morning, while she was in the shower, I pulled a bag from the closet and packed what I needed. Not everything, just what mattered. Work clothes, documents, laptop, a few things I'd carried with me since before the marriage that had always quietly been mine. I left my key on the kitchen counter. I texted Thatcher, "Can I stay with you for a few days?" His response came in under 2 minutes. Already clearing the room. Drive safe. I drove out of Cherry Creek without looking in the rearview mirror. I don't say that for effect. I genuinely didn't look. The days at Thatcher's place blurred together in the best possible way. He had a 2-bedroom apartment in Lodo, close to the office, and he asked nothing of me except to show up at the dinner table when he cooked. He cooked most nights. We talked when I needed to and watched television when I didn't, and he never once said "I told you so," because that's not the kind of man he is. I called Sawyer after a week and said, "Let's move forward." The paperwork started quietly, without drama. I found a furnished apartment near my office. Signed a 12-month lease on a Tuesday afternoon with a real estate agent named Parker, who kept the whole thing professional and efficient, which was exactly what I needed it to be. I moved in with 2 suitcases and ordered a mattress online. And then, for the first time in a long time, I exhaled. The first month alone was harder than I expected and easier than I feared. The hard part was the silence. Not the bad kind. The house we'd shared had been full of a particular silence for months. The kind that grows between 2 people who have stopped reaching for each other. This was different. This was just empty space waiting to be filled by something new. I started running again. I'd stopped years ago, not for any dramatic reason, just life accumulating in the way it does. I ran badly at first, 3 blocks before I needed to stop, but I kept going out. By the end of the first month, I was running 3 miles without stopping. I slept better than I had in 2 years. My appetite came back, properly this time. I cooked actual meals, not the performative dinners I'd been making in Cherry Creek, while hoping food might fix what words couldn't. At work, I threw myself in completely. Mason, our company director, noticed. Said something during a team meeting about the quality of work coming out of my desk. I didn't tell him I'd recently had every distraction in my personal life removed at once. I just nodded and kept going. I heard things through Quentin over those months. Not because I was asking, but because Quentin is Quentin and silence isn't really in his nature. Ansley and Callan had made things official quickly, publicly, the kind of social media rollout that felt like a statement, which I suppose it was. Posts with captions about new chapters and finally, and choosing yourself. People commented warmly. Friends she'd known for years liked the photos. From the outside, it looked like everything she'd said she wanted. I looked once, closed the screen, didn't look again. I want to be clear about something. I was not performing wellness during those months. I wasn't running so people would notice. I wasn't posting about growth or reinvention. I wasn't calling mutual friends to manage the narrative. I was just living. And it turned out that living, plainly, without the constant low-grade tension of a marriage I'd been trying to rescue, was considerably better. My sister Greer came to visit in June and spent a weekend reorganizing my apartment with the confidence of someone who had not been asked to do this, but knew she was right to do it anyway. She stood in my kitchen on Sunday morning, made coffee, looked at me for a long moment. "You look like yourself again." Was I not? "Not for a long time," she said. "You were very busy being careful." I didn't have a response to that because she was correct. 6 months after I left, I met Evelyn, my client, the one I'd been working with on the restructuring project, for dinner. This requires context. Our professional relationship had been ongoing for almost 2 years. She was sharp, direct, and had a way of asking questions that expected real answers. We'd always gotten along well, the way you do with clients you genuinely respect. The dinner was a wrap on the project. Professional. A thank you meal and a conversation about what came next. Somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation shifted in the way that sometimes happens when 2 people realize they've been circling something without acknowledging it. I didn't rush anything. Neither did she. We had dinner again 3 weeks later. That one wasn't business. The cracks in Ansley's new life began appearing around month 4 or 5. Again, I didn't seek this information. It arrived through Quentin, through Greer, who knew people, through the ordinary mechanics of a life that had once been interconnected with mine. Callan, it turned out, was not the person he had seemed to be. He had an ex-girlfriend, Elodie, who had been saying things to mutual acquaintances. Things about patterns. Repeated patterns. The way a new relationship would begin with intensity and promises and a particular language of specialness before slowly revealing something far more ordinary underneath. Ansley, apparently, was learning the same vocabulary. The post slowed down. The captions changed in tone, from triumphant to vague. A photograph of a coffee cup with morning light. A quote about peace. Nothing featuring Callan anymore. Their mutual friends started going quiet on social media too. I noticed. I didn't celebrate it. I understood it as information rather than vindication. Harper, Ansley's cousin, someone I'd always liked, reached out to me in September. A simple text, "Hey, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay." I replied honestly, "Doing well, actually. Thank you for reaching out." She responded, "Glad." She's not. Just so you know. In case you were wondering. I sat with that for a moment. Then I typed, "I hope she finds what she's looking for." And I meant it. Not as a performance of maturity. Not as a way of sounding evolved. I genuinely meant it. Because the alternative, holding on to resentment, measuring my happiness against her unhappiness, wasn't something I was willing to do with whatever came next. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in October, 7 months after I left. Her number appeared on my screen, and I looked at it for 3 full rings before answering. "Hey," I said. A pause. Then, "Hi." Her voice was quieter than I remembered, stripped of the certainty that had been there during those final months. "I've been wanting to call for a while," she said. "Okay." She stopped. Started again. "I think I made a mistake. I think I lost sight of something real because I was chasing something that looked different from the outside." I let the sentence sit for a moment. "Are you okay?" I asked. Genuine question. "Not really. I'm sorry to hear that." Another pause. Longer this time. "Is there any chance we could, I don't know, talk properly?" I thought about how to answer honestly without being unkind. "I think talking is okay," I said, "but I want to be clear with you up front about something. Where I am right now in my life, it's moved forward. Genuinely. I'm not sitting here waiting, Ansley. I want you to know that before we sit down together, so there's no confusion about what this conversation can or can't be." Silence. "Okay," she said finally. Very quietly. "Okay," I said. We met at a coffee place near downtown. Neutral ground. She looked tired in the way that isn't about sleep. I looked, I suppose, like someone who had been sleeping fine. We sat across from each other, and she talked. I let her. She talked about Callan, about how quickly the reality had diverged from the vision, about the things Elodie had warned people about that turned out to be true, about friends who had slowly started keeping their distance once the performance of the relationship wore off, about her mother, Corinne, who had tried to stay neutral and found she couldn't. She talked about regret. Not directly, but it was in every sentence. I listened. I didn't fill silences with reassurances. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression I'd had in our final months. The look of someone hoping the other person will offer a door. "I miss you," she said. I nodded slowly. "I believe you. Is that all you're going to say?" "No." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. "I'm going to say that I spent a long time in a marriage that I was trying to save alone. You were already gone, emotionally, practically. You just hadn't said it yet. And when you finally did say it, you said it in the most complete way possible." She looked down at the table. "I also want you to know," I continued, "that I don't have anger toward you anymore. I don't carry it. But that doesn't mean I'm available to step back into something that broke the way ours broke. People recover from things like this," she said. "Some do," I said. "But I've built something in these 7 months that I'm not willing to dismantle as an experiment." "Something? You mean someone?" I didn't confirm or deny. It wasn't the point. "I mean something," I said. "A life that's genuinely mine. That fits. That I don't have to hold together with effort and hope." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You're happy." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't bitter. It was just recognition. "Yeah," I said. "I am." She nodded once. Pressed her lips together. "That's the part that's hardest," she said. "Not that you've moved on, but that you're you. The you I always knew was in there and kept waiting to see. You're just being it now. Without me." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said the truest thing I had. "I think leaving gave me permission to stop being careful." She looked at me for a long moment. "I did that to us," she said. "Yeah," I said. "You did." We stayed for another 20 minutes. Finished our coffee. The conversation moved to smaller things, how her job was going, how my sister was doing, the ordinary currencies of a shared history that would always exist between us even now. When we stood to leave, she hugged me. I hugged her back. Briefly. Honestly. Outside on the sidewalk, she looked at me one more time. "Take care of yourself," I said. She nodded, and she walked away. I called Thatcher that evening from my apartment. Told him how it had gone. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. Genuinely thought about it, the way the question deserved. Done, I said. Not in a hard way. Just finished. Like a chapter that's been over for a while has finally turned. Good, he said. Yeah, I said. Good. That night, I made dinner. Something I'd been experimenting with. A new recipe, something more complicated than I used to attempt. I opened a bottle of wine. I put on music. I stood in my kitchen, in my apartment, in a life that had been built one decision at a time over the last 7 months. And I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could precisely measure. Light. Just genuinely, quietly light. Ansley came looking for the life she left behind. It wasn't there anymore. It was somewhere better. And so was I.